There we go. So we'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging that the land McMaster University is built upon is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations. So this territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. The wampum uses the symbolization of a dish to represent the territory, and one spoon to represent the people are to share the resources of the land and take only what they need. For those of you who are not on or around the McMaster campus, I would highly encourage you to research and reflect on the history of the Indigenous peoples whose land you occupy. An excellent resource for this ongoing learning process is native-land.ca/, and we'll be posting that in the chat and on the Microsoft Teams as well. And as we continue with our programming both tonight and in the coming weeks, we give honor and thanks to the traditional inhabitants of the lands we occupy and acknowledge that it's our responsibility as guests of these lands to respect the land and the relationship that the Indigenous peoples have with the land. We'd also like to thank McMaster University and the Department of Outdoor Recreation and their Athletics and Recreation for making this event possible. So just a few housekeeping items. I will note that this panel discussion is being recorded, as you just heard, and made available to news participants following the event. So that's just something to keep in mind if you do decide to turn on your camera or your microphone at the end to ask a question. Just keep in mind that it is being recorded. Additionally, I will ask that all participants who are not speaking keep their microphones on mute just to reduce background noise and keep their video off just so we can have Zoom run as smoothly as possible. And if you have any questions or concerns, we just ask that you use the chat function on Zoom, or following the discussion, feel free to just raise your hand and ask a question directly to our panelists. So to begin, we're just going to do some quick introductions. So my name is Christie. I'm in level 2 astrophysics at McMaster University. I'm one of the coordinators for this year's news program and one of the trip coordinators for the outdoor club. If you have any questions about that, feel free to ask me. In the summers outside of school, I work at the Gold Lake Outdoor Education Center, leading backcountry outdoor leadership programs, and I'm super excited to dive into today's topic. And so let's start to introduce our panelists. Maybe we can start with Kyle. If you just want to introduce who you are, where you're from, and maybe your favorite thing about the outdoors.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, hi everyone, thanks for joining us. So I'm Kyle, co-founder of The Weight We Carry with my brother Tom Schellenberg, who's also in on the talk. We are a not-for-profit organization whose aim is to carry canoes to the most unlikely places on Earth in support of mental health. In, I guess, about a year and a half ago now, in January of 2019, we carried canoes over about 3 weeks to Mount Everest Base Camp and back as a way of drawing attention to a really important cause and fundraising for the construction of a women's mental health center for a Nepalese charity. So we're still in the process of fundraising for that. I'm talking to you today from Australia, where I live in Melbourne. So it's actually Friday here, which I'm really excited about, right on the cusp of the weekend. And yeah, I think that's, I'll pass it over to the next person. Oh, sorry, Hannah, I was supposed to mention my favorite thing about the outdoors. That is a great question. Since I've been really young, some of my earliest memories are from camping with my parents when I was quite young. One memory that really sticks is when Tom and I were 3 and 5 years old. Our mom had just separated from our dad, and we were these young, rambunctious kids, and she decided to, coming straight out of a divorce, just to pack us in the car and drive all the way across Canada, camping the whole way. And it was a life-changing trip for both Tom and I. I think ever since then, we've been kind of addicted to adventure. And I really have to give kudos to my mom for doing that, you know, in such a hard time of her life packing these rambunctious kids into a little Nissan Sentra and driving across the country. So really that's just sort of inspired like a love for nature in general for me and the outdoors. These days I'm an obsessive cyclist, but I love all types of camping and just getting outdoors in general.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Tom, do you maybe want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Tom Schellenberg, also co-founder of The Weight We Carry with Kyle. So you've heard about The Weight We Carry now. I mean, I find it tough to think of my favorite thing about the outdoors, but I have a memory of camping as well, actually with our dad. So that would have been after the divorce. Just with our dad's side of the family, our dad would always take us to Algonquin Provincial Park as young kids. And he always taught us about, we'd go to campsites, and he had us so well trained on, we've got to leave this campsite better than we found it. And we'd go running around and trying to find rocks to build little benches, or to, we'd portage in. So there was no site services or anything like that. And just try to build things in the site. And I just love doing that. And remember Kyle and our other younger brother, Seaton. I don't know if anybody's did those little sap boats where you break the little twigs and you jab them into the sap trees, run out and throw them in the water and see how far they'll go. I don't know, that's just where we used to go to Algonquin at least once a year with our family, and kind of where I feel like, I guess I cut my teeth for my love for the outdoors. And now I'm also an avid outdoor, get outside and be active kind of person. Just get outside, and I like rowing, biking, or running, or climbing, or anything outside. It's where I feel the most at peace and the most who I love to be.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. Nathan, maybe you can introduce yourself next.
Sure. My name's Nathan. I do counseling with students at McMaster. So I'm feeling tied to some of my people here. I've been at Mac for almost 17 years, and I also do some private practice work right now as a psychologist. And my work as a psychologist has also intersected with love of the outdoors. So I've been an advocate. I used to do walk and talk sessions with students, and when I got my wings clipped on that, they still allow us to continue a program called Walk in Nature. So that is something that we're still running now, and we're trying to do a virtual walk in nature where people bring their pictures. And one of the questions that I've asked people in the past is, what are some of your favorite memories of the outdoors? Because they're sometimes, and you hear that they're formative experiences. I would reflect that as well. My parents instilled in us a love of camping and traveling, and I think it was a VW station wagon pulling a pop-up tent trailer that made it all the way to the East Coast. What we were amazed was that it made it back to Toronto after going all the way to the East Coast. But that family truckster trip was notorious, and since that time, my wife and I, and first with our 4 children, we traveled all the way to Vancouver Island and then back, and then with 5 children, we did all the way to Newfoundland, and so we've touched both oceans, and lots of wonderful experiences, and camping along the way in either direction, so that the experience of travel is very, based in pitching a tent and having a campfire and sort of being in the woods and being in nature. Those are tremendous formative experiences, both in my childhood and something that I'm now also able to provide for my children.
That's so wonderful. Thanks so much. Meagan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Meagan McConnell, and I am a clinical social worker at Kingston General Hospital, and I've done a lot of mental health work abroad with my own mental health organization, Peace in Minds, as well as with Doctors Without Borders. For me, the outdoors is less camping and more, I grew up on a farm. I was always outside. We always lived in the middle of nowhere. And my favorite part are the smells and the sounds. And I feel like that's kind of what brings me back to me and centers me and gives me a bit of a break. I've spent lots of years in cities and going to school, and going out in the country and taking a deep breath there's nothing like it. So I think that's really where I come from.
Thank you so much. I definitely relate to the feeling of like just peace when you go outside and just kind of like hear all the sounds of nature and like all the smells. So I guess we'll start in our questions, and I'll just reiterate once more. If anyone has any questions for our panelists, there will be an opportunity at the end to ask them directly, or feel free to message them in the chat, and we'll ask them at the end as well. But so my first question is, what is one common belief or misconception about mental health that you have always wanted to correct? And maybe we can start with Meagan and then go along with the other panelists.
Sure. The first thing that pops into my mind is people think that if someone has a mental health issue or a mental health diagnosis, that it's permanent, and that they have to take medication or they're going to struggle with it forever, and it's like a stamp on who they are. And that's just not the case. We all fluctuate through things. We all move through life at a different pace and in different ways, especially youth. They could have one diagnosis at the age of 8, they could have another at 12, and they could have no diagnosis and no mental health concerns by 25. That it's not to say some people don't have lifelong journeys with that, but that it's so fluctuating and it's so dependent on the person and what they're involved in and what's going on, that if you develop a mental health concern at the age of 20, this is not a stamp on the rest of your life. It's a piece of your journey and what you're going through, and whether it stays with you for the rest of your life or not, it doesn't have to be an identifying feature.
Nice. I'll piggyback on that, and I think that, you know, in terms of what Meagan said, one of the misconceptions for me as well that I always want to just sort of halt the conversation is just definition of terms, because people say mental health, but we could be saying like, oh, how's your mental health? Because we all have mental health, right? There's that bit of terminology, and then there's mental health issues, and then there's maybe mental illness. So in terms of how we throw terminology around, it can be, you know, challenging and problematic because we may not all be talking about the same thing. So that in and of itself can be a misconception. So definition of terms is important. And when it comes to this, I like the work of Corey Keyes. He talks about mental health and mental illness as being a continuum. And then he also talks about flourishing and languishing as being a continuum, because you can be someone who doesn't have a chronic and persistent mental illness like schizophrenia. You may just have an anxiety-related concern, but you don't get out of the house very much. You don't have a lot of friends. You may be languishing. And someone who has schizophrenia, which is a lifelong mental illness, which does require medication and you know, various supports, could be flourishing. They may have a part-time job or a small business or, you know, a vibrant friend group. And that conceptualization to me is very helpful, because it blows a lot of the stereotypes that we have about mental illness and the fact that it's debilitating or lifelong. So I would very much echo what Meagan has said. And we all want to look at ourselves as being on that rubric somewhere as well, because we all exist on that continuum. And you should always ask yourself, like, how's your mental health? Because it applies to all of us. It's not an us and them, right?
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that, because that's exactly how I feel, Nathan. I mean, from my own perspective and my own experience, just growing up, I would say I was about 22 years old when I was feeling like I had poor mental health, right? And I think the thing that I feel is learning through starting the Weight We Carry is just how at the time when I felt this way and felt anxious and uneasy about myself and poor self like identity, I just really was really unsure of my own feelings. Was really honestly the first step where I was always having trouble making any decisions. And so I guess I would classify that as poor mental health that I was having. But I realized now just you're not at all alone in that. Like everybody can intimately relate. And I think that's one of the strongest things that I've learned and would like to get out there for everybody to know is since we've started The Weight We Carry, everyone we talk to about the weight we carry, it's either, you know, they want to talk about their own personal experiences or tell us about their siblings or their mom or their dad or their uncles, aunts. Like everybody is so close to it. And we all, as Nathan said, we all have mental health. And I just believe that fluctuates and it's okay. And so for me, yeah, when going through that, when I was younger and starting to work with a psychologist, I was, you know, I felt like at first it was bad. I was doing something like there was something wrong with me, but I've learned that was the best thing I've done in my life. And I've continued that practice of working with a psychologist. And it's really just helped me learn so much about myself and my own mental health and get my own tools for when I need to take care of myself and how to take care of myself. And yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that was incredible. I really, really loved what all of you guys just said there, Megan, Tom, and Nathan. And what you said, Nathan, about that sort of matrix that you described with mental health, mental illness, languishing and languishing was just so relevant. I really like the way you described that so concisely. And I think that sort of brings me to what I feel is sort of one of the biggest misconceptions, something maybe that's even just relevant in my mind currently, with more, especially the mental health side of that matrix, if you will, that you were speaking about. It really is something, as you mentioned, that every one of us on this planet have mental health, whether it's great at times or poor at times, but it's something that's always fluctuating. And we do all go through challenges in mental health, and it's nothing to be ashamed of at all. And I guess I sort of have a two-part feeling to that. And the other part of that is there's stigmas all around the world, including in our home countries, that having bad anxiety or being depressed or anything like that makes you weak. And it's completely untrue. If anything, in a lot of cases, it's more so the opposite. Overcoming challenges like that in your life is what makes you a strong person. And in terms of poor mental health, I've gone through my own struggles in life. I've been at absolute rock bottom at points in my life. I've seen a therapist for years on end. And I really think that was such an important thing for me to be able to have access to. And I think it's important for all of us to be able to acknowledge that we all go through these things together. It's not just isolated people who have these challenges in mental health. Yeah, I think I will leave it there, but oh, sorry, what I wanted to finish off with there is so I think thinking about that, I think it is really important when we can for all of us to open up about our mental health and just make people understand, because people tend to feel isolated when they think it's only them that's going through these challenges. By discussing it together, it sort of allows people to see that these are challenges a lot of us go through, and that doesn't make you weak. If anything, it makes you a strong person for being able to talk about those things. You know, I don't know if we have it in Canada. I know here in Australia, Are You Okay Day is a very popular, it's an ongoing day every year where you ask your friends and family and people around you whether they're okay. I think that's really, really great. But I really think what is in a lot of ways, what's really important is also asking ourselves if we're okay. And if we can, talking to other people about that, just to help eliminate stigmas and show people that, you know, mental health is something we all deal with day to day.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. You've definitely brought up so many points that I'm sure we'll all be trying to like write down in our minds and remember in our day-to-day life. So unless anyone has anything to add on to that, I guess we'll move on to our next question. So in an everyday setting, and some of these points have been brought up before, how does mental health affect the community? So what kind of things can influence someone's mental health, and how do things change when our daily lives change? For example, like a pandemic happens. So maybe we can start with Nathan, and then people can jump in.
Sure. When I was reading over this question or thinking about it, I was thinking more about sort of, demographically, how often does this show up? Or sometimes I'll give feedback, and I know Tom said, hey, I don't feel comfortable to do stats. I don't know that I'm in such a good position to do stats, but I do know that, there's stats like 1 in 5 and there's stats like 1 in 3. This just gives you the idea that among the population at any given time across the lifespan, somebody could be experiencing this. So it kind of echoes what we talked about earlier, that everybody deals with mental health. It can show up. It is episodic. So while it shows up, it can also resolve. In terms of a university population, I know from being on the counseling center end of things, whatever comes in the door is likely going to get tagged as either, a mood related issue or an anxiety related issue. And that's what we certainly see lots of. And we just do see an increase in the volume of that, although the service is inundated. So it's hard to say exactly. I think if we doubled the number of counselors, we would just double the number of clients. So we're always kind of maxed out a little bit. We also do see an increase in some severity around so with added anxiety, you just see more worry, and with political unrest and situations related to the pandemic, for people it seemed like there was already an epidemic of anxiety. There just seems to be, probably more of it because there's more things that are on people's minds that are of concern. So in terms of among the things that are probably most consistent, however, still are worries about things like education, career, finance, health, and relationships. This, I would say, is sort of the bread and butter of what I see with generalized anxiety and worry. And so it's as simple as I prefer to call it, 7 steps to death, because it's, if you do bad on the test, then you do bad in the class, then you get a bad GPA, then you don't get a good job, you don't make good money, you don't meet the right people, and then you die alone, get eaten by your cats. 7 steps to death, right? That's sort of generalized anxiety and worry in a nutshell, where people sort of engage in that business of future projection. So I see lots of it in the community, and, I have my own pet theories as to how things like social media and social comparison also seem to drive and ramp up. People don't get a rest from a digital platform, and then they're thinking, oh, wow, Kyle's life is so cool. He lives in Australia, and look at me, I'm stuck in Hamilton, and this is incredibly horrible. He has a ukulele and a mandolin, and I only have a ukulele. So, clearly Kyle's life is better than mine. And if I do a dollars to dollars comparison like that, which a lot of people do, they often come out a day late and a dollar short. So that's sort of the depressive end of the continuum relative to the anxious end of things. So I'll stop with that, but those are some of the clear pieces that I see in terms of what walks in. And I think that's also somewhat reflective of sort of not just a university population, but also sort of an every day-to-day population. Those are some of the ways in which mental health can infect and affect people.
I can jump in and just pick up off social media as well. I think it's interesting to work as an adult when social media is starting to take such a toll on youth. And we see it constantly, whether it's 13 Reasons Why on Netflix, or it's Snapchat, or other things that I should probably be more well versed in, but I'm just not, because I don't have them. But I mean, anybody my age or my grandma who is convinced she needs Instagram. That we all compare ourselves on social media, and that's a reality. That's a platform of our life now. That's not going away. That's a platform of communication. It's a part of everyday life for most people. So if grown adults still compare each other and compare ourselves to unrealistic things that we see on the internet, or it used to be in magazines and stuff like that, you can only imagine what the developing and anxious and, moderate self-esteem of a young person is experiencing when they're looking at similar things. And there's some wild statistic that says something along the lines of like 75% of the great things you see on Instagram were posted on that person's worst day. So we're not posting our reality most of the time, we're posting our highlight reel. But if an adult brain isn't always capable of sifting through that logic and protecting ourselves and valuing ourselves regardless of somebody else's highlight reel, we can't expect our youth to be able to do that either. And that's definitely a huge factor that we see in the hospital on a daily basis.
Wow, Megan, I really appreciate that. That's not, I feel like that's something I've always been, thought about and been concerned about, but you just articulated that so well. So thanks. That was great. For myself, this question, I guess, rather than in the community, I can relate to it more just personally and individually coming through school. And I felt the pressures of high school and into university in particular, like the social pressures to belong to a certain group of friends or try to keep a certain group of friends, and associating my own values with what their values were. Like I felt like there was always so much pressure to be with a group, and not be an outcast, and or feel like an outcast. And I think because of that, I felt I always denied my own values and who I truly was to try to fit in. And I found when I, got through school, I then was left a bit with an identity crisis because I didn't really ever take the time to form my own identity. Instead, I formed an identity that was around a group of people and trying to fit into that group of people. And so that's one of the biggest things I think that had led to my poor mental health, was just all of a sudden then you're out of school and you're done school, and I felt alone and unsure of who I was, because I didn't try to chase around a group of friends anymore. And I've seen a lot of my friends go through the same thing and take up all sorts of bad habits because it's a really tough place to be in. And really just started questioning those feelings. And I think that's, I've come to a conclusion that from speaking out and talking about it and being vulnerable with my emotions, and that it happens for all of us. But that's the experience I had within and have been having within the community, is just that, it feels like you have to conform to how the way other people feel. But it's truly about connecting with yourself and being yourself. Otherwise, I just felt completely lost for a long time.
Awesome, guys. Yeah, I really appreciated what everybody brought up there. That was really, really great. Thinking about this question, I guess just to reiterate for the group, we sort of discussed it before a bit, but Tom and I just like to make people aware that we're not mental health professionals like Megan and Nathan are. So we really just sort of like to speak from our own personal experiences and knowledge and experience of our friends and family and that kind of thing. But on the topic of mental health effect on the community, something that I just think is really, really relevant at the moment is obviously with COVID. We know that crisis centers and mental health centers are seeing a lot more people. This is, we're going through a pandemic, and these sort of external factors like pandemics, natural disasters, and that sort of thing do put a lot of pressure on us and can really add to our stress levels and anxiety levels. So I think it's just really important for all of us to really look inwards at this time and just make sure that we are being as kind to ourselves as we can be. It's putting a lot of financial stress on people, and not being able to see your loved ones and that kind of thing. So I think it's just something to be aware of, that sometimes these major external things like natural disasters and pandemics can really have a large effect on us. And we don't always realize it right in the initial stages of them. Usually, at least speaking for myself, in the beginning of COVID, I definitely felt very anxious, but I didn't really realize the effect it was having on me, because I think the adrenaline was still there, and it was there was a lot of uncertainty and about everything. And it's kind of a couple months in when you really start, the dust starts to settle, at least for me, and you start to sort of realize the impacts it's having on you. So I guess I'm just sort of trying to remind everybody to, of the importance of touching in with ourselves, and thinking about those things. Another thing I just wanted to discuss, because I just really liked what you said about it, Meagan and Nathan and Tom, is, and this is just because it's something that's really relevant for me at the moment and something I'm thinking about a lot, but it's just the effect that social media and our phones and the constant notifications have on us. Like, we know that social media is actually, and our phones is actually hijacking the dopamine receptors in our brain. It's making us feel like it's good for us to be checking that all the time. And I know it only takes me 5 or 10 minutes of being on my phone. When I put it down, I get this sort of depressed feeling, and I just get this anxious niggling constantly to look back at my phone, and you find yourself looking at nothing. And it's because, like, neurologically, these signals are actually hijacking our dopamine sensors. I've heard it actually being described as very similar to gambling, which might be something Nathan might be able to comment on, because I saw that he was experienced in that area. But from what I've read, the way it's triggering us is actually very similar to a gambling addiction. So it's just making you want to check your phone constantly to see if, oh, what if there's that recognition there, or what if there's this good thing there. So again, I think just something to be aware of, and I think a really good way of counteracting that. And it's a little bit challenging depending on where you live in the world and what the COVID restrictions are at the moment, but just the importance of nature and the wilderness is such a good thing for our mental health, and can really help I find personally, when I've got a stressful work week, I'm on my phone all the time, I'm doing this and that, and my brain just, on the weekend, it's still firing constantly. For me, being in the wilderness just really helps me find that balance again. Like, just being in the woods, it happens so quickly. You can just feel your body relax. So that's something that really works for me anyway.
Those are amazing points that everyone brought up. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. What you just said, Kyle, leads us perfectly into the next question that I have, which are, what are some, or if there are some benefits of the outdoors on our mental health, and like, how can we access those? Maybe can we start with Nathan this time?
Sure. I'd like to tip my hat to Wayne Terryberry, who's in the audience there. Wayne and I worked together on a project, and he's a major positive influencer for outdoor ed, and works tirelessly on developing trails and preaching all the goodness of the outdoors. Together, we did a lot of research, but I got a lot of the research from Wayne, and in our conversations together, and in reading over some of the things that he'd looked at, just such a growing awareness of the literature that's there on, you know, health in the outdoors. And some of the interesting research started with, he had his own randomized controlled trial of people who were doing hospital recovery. Some people had a room with a view, some people did not. And the people who had the room with the review showed faster recovery rates and less painkillers. And that was some of the early work that really, you know, generated some of the interest in what the impact of nature is. And since that time, we see lots of proliferation of this in terms of, you know, Japanese forest bathing. The Koreans are also doing a lot of amazing research looking at the impact on blood pressure and stress cortisol levels. So, you know, the things that we know in our heart are now also being proven by science, which is really very exciting. And it goes beyond just sort of those immediate health benefits of measurable things like blood pressure and lowered stress cortisol responses, but we've actually shown that, you know, after a backpacking trip, people can show increased cognitive creativity and imagination and stuff like that. So definite, absolute from a science perspective. And then I would say I'd reflect it from a personal perspective. Our choice for vacation as a family, this was the first time that, you know, as much as we love backcountry, with 7 of us, it was always a little bit confusing as to how we were going to conquer the backcountry. So this was one of the first years we did a canoe trip, and we went out with our kayak and a canoe and in a borrowed canoe to Massasauga Park, which is the archipelago out by Georgian Bay. And as a family, we did some backcountry camping, well, kind of glamping. We had a 2-burner Coleman stove after all, because we had so many boats going out, but it was charming. No portages and easy entry, but still that backcountry feel. And yeah, it just left me very, very recharged after, you know, having not had vacation since the start of COVID. And as I reflected on that, I just did say as well, I left my phone behind in the car, although I have only an iPhone 4, which everybody finds rather laughable. So it's not really much of a phone at all. There's no dopamine hit there. But leaving the phone behind is very much, I thought it's funny. We recharge by being unplugged, right? So I certainly can attest to that, both from a science perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So go outdoors.
On the science side of things as well, it's very similar to what you were saying, Nathan, that there's lots of studies about plants, and if you especially plants in old age homes.
Can you get your sound up a little bit more, Megan?
Yeah, we've lost hearing you.
Pull that phone in a little bit.
Get even closer.
There we go.
That's good. Yep. There we go.
That plants in old age homes and plants for people with anxiety and things like that make a significant difference. And that it gives you a sense of purpose. It gives you a sense of control. It gives you a sense of hope, and you're looking towards something in the future of it growing and flourishing and all these things. So it's very interesting how even if you bring the outdoors inside to you, it can still make such a large impact. Another thing about being outside is the lack of light and noise pollution. So there's so much conversation right now about noise pollution and its effect on brain development and functioning and all these things. And light pollution is the same, but mainly for your sleep quality and stuff like that. And so removing those things from your system and being able to sleep and function and live without that for a few days or however long you're out there, I think as much as we feel the reset, I think there's a lot more happening underneath of our bodies just getting a break from a world that we were not built for.
Right on.
Yeah, that's really, really nice to think about. Yeah, I feel like I measure a good weekend for myself with the amount of time I'm outside. You know, I really try to get up and go do something outside in the morning, if it's canoeing or rowing or something around, and then come back home and eat and then get back out for a hike or do something else. And I think Meagan, you nailed it there. I didn't know what's the reason behind it, but I always find when I do those kind of days, I sleep so much better and I feel so much calmer and I just feel much more rejuvenated. And there's a bit of the travel thing that I love about, spending anytime I can travel outside, as well as just this feeling of survival. Like when it's outside, it just feels like it brings me back to, I don't know, animalistic needs, or just all you got to do is eat, sleep, and walk around outside. Or if you got to get somewhere, you can hike there or swim there. And there's something about that simplicity where I'm not worried about everything else around me, and maybe it's in the other noises or people or other stimuli. It's just what's there. It just helps me be so much more present with the environment and what's going on. And yeah, just even to bring that into camping that's the love I have for camping. Is just, it's about where you are in that day exactly. And if the sun's going down, you better go get firewood, because it's going to be dark if you want to have a fire. And just that simplicity that nature brings is, I know it from my own feelings that it's so good on my mental health.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is actually a perfect one for me to speak from my personal experience at this point in time. Like I said, not being a mental health professional myself, really, Tom and I are just glorified fundraisers and canoe carriers. But at the moment, something that's really relevant to me is just we've got pretty heavy restrictions here in Melbourne at the moment. So we're not actually allowed to go within 5 kilometers of our house. And we're allowed to exercise outside, but just for 1 hour a day. And I'm a endurance cyclist, so it's not very conducive to endurance cycling. You can't really go out and ride for hours at all. So and also with the 5 kilometer radius, even if you want to go bathe in the nature, as the Japanese would say, you can't. Like, we live in the city, so there's no access to nature. So I think finding different sort of coping mechanisms with the situation that we have is really relevant to me at the moment. One thing that I thought of when Meagan was speaking before is just, I really agree that having plants inside, there is science there. I don't exactly know what it is. And it's same as when you go into nature and all of your body's levels come back again, as Nathan was mentioning, there is actually science there as well. But just having plants in your house, even just having a plant on your desk, like I've got this beautiful little fern here. My partner, who's listening from the other room, I'm pretty sure, has got a pretty big obsession with plants. So we've got almost 100 plants in our tiny little apartment. About 20 of them are out front, actually, but we're pretty much just surrounded by plants in here, which really, really helps. Sorry, Nathan, I've been really bragging about all my instruments and plants in this talk, but that's something, I guess, just what I'm trying to say is, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade in a way. At the moment, yeah, it's really hard. I know it's good for me to go out in nature, but I can't do it. So having house plants inside, finding different ways of riding your bike. Before we had the 1 hour restriction, we just had the 5 kilometer restriction. I rode all day long just around our immediate block on my bike. I rode 200 kilometers by circling my block 230 times as a way of getting endurance exercise. So sometimes we have to kind of think outside the box at the moment with COVID restrictions, depending on how they're affecting you. It's always sort of easier to, I find on the surface, it's always easiest to be sucked into social media or something like that. Our brains, it's like they're intuitively telling us to do something that's not good for us sometimes. You know, we're discouraged, so we want to eat food that's not good for us and binge on Facebook on our phones. But I have learned, and I think it's really important to remember, that sometimes maybe it takes that little bit more effort on the surface to go out for a walk in nature or go ride your bike. But I can promise you the return is much better. You'll feel much better afterwards for having done that. It's just not always what's immediately apparent to our brains. So yeah, that's sort of my reflection on mental health in the wilderness from where I am in life right now.
Amazing. That leads us perfectly into our next question. And I know we've talked a lot about mental health in the outdoors in kind of a general sense. But I know like Meagan has done a lot of work in some remote locations. And then of course, Kyle and Tom, you went all the way up to Everest Base Camp, which is, some may say, in the middle of nowhere. But I was wondering how, like, traveling in unknown or remote locations, which is a common occurrence in a lot of outdoor trips that we run, anyone does, or that we run specifically through the Outdoor Club. And I was wondering how that could affect mental health. For example, I know I did a 2-week river trip up on the Missinaibi, so Northern Ontario. And I was with, you know, a group of 14 of my peers, but just being, you know, separated from like my day-to-day life, my normal support system, like just the conversations that we were having about mental health were so different than what we may have in the city. So I was wondering, like, how does like location and being in an unknown place, how can that affect our mental health? And is there something that we as outdoor leaders should be aware of, like when we're leading trips with different participants?
I can start. I think for me, a big part of it is becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. And we grow up, can you hear me okay? Because I'm not as close. We grow up in a society these days where you're not allowed to fail at school, and you sometimes live in a bubble, and a lot of things are predictable, and they say you should raise your child in this schedule, and so they always know what's coming next. So when you get to a circumstance where you don't know what's coming next, which is real life, it makes people really uncomfortable and really anxious. And realizing what's in your control and focusing just on what you can control in your own person. You can't control what other people do. You can't control what nature does. You can't do anything. And that you grow a lot in those moments of uncertainty and those moments of unknown, and that fear isn't always a bad thing. Fear is so often looked at as, I'm afraid of everything and I'm anxious and I can't do something. Fear is just your brain telling you that maybe we should think about this, and maybe we need to make a plan. And maybe if we don't have a plan or we can't control this, like maybe I should just be a little bit more aware of what's going on. It's a perfectly natural experience, but again, in the world that we live in, most of us don't experience true fear, sometimes ever. So being able to go outside and go on those types of trips, and if you put me in the middle of the forest in the middle of nowhere, I would be afraid. I've worked in war zones, and I would prefer that over being in the middle of the forest by myself, because it's what I don't know. So I think it's like teaching kids to just be okay with that, and that the world is not controllable, and that everything will still be fine. And even if it's not fine, you'll get over it, and you'll get through it, and you'll figure it out. And I think that's how people grow and just like move forward into being more than just your basic person that grew up and lives in a bubble.
Yeah, I'll jump in there to mix up the order a bit. I've been kind of waiting to go last each time and piggybacking on everybody else's answers. So, but I'm still going to piggyback on what you said, Meagan, because I think that was really great. And what you just said is something that's so relevant to me in life at the moment. And really, I think what it boils down to for me is overcoming challenges and goal setting and proving to yourself that you can do things that you didn't think you could do. I can relate that for the musicians out there, to even just playing that moment when you play something on the piano or the guitar that you never thought you'd be able to, and pushing and going from there straight to doing a big hike that you didn't think you could do. Sort of leaning into what's uncomfortable and being able to overcome that, I just find is something I've sort of worked into my own practice in life, and it is so rewarding to do that. And where that really ties into mental health in remote settings and the wilderness for me is it's uncomfortable to go so far away from our comforts, our home creature comforts and that kind of thing. But it gives us a lot of insight, and it really demonstrates to us that we're able to do something we didn't know we could do, which is really, really gratifying in a lot of ways. When Tom and I decided to, like, on a whim, we just were hiking in the Himalayas, and we said, we're going to portage canoes to Mount Everest Base Camp. We had absolutely no idea that we could do that. And for the whole 2 years it took us to get ready to do it, even when we landed there, even when we started hiking, even a week into portaging with the canoes, actually probably even mostly a week into portaging with the canoes, we really didn't know if we could do what we had pledged to everybody that we were going to do. It was really uncomfortable at times, because we had got a lot of people to back us and support, well, to donate to the charity in Nepal, but on behalf of our mission. So it was really, really scary. But even if we hadn't made it, I think just overcoming that challenge was such an important thing. Looking at problems in our life as not necessarily things to avoid, but actually things that we're meant to overcome problems. We're meant to, life isn't meant to just be super comfortable and just taking it easy all the time. We have to work to live, and we have to make money to put food on the table and that kind of thing. And acknowledging that, for me, acknowledging that problems are good for me, and trying to look at them, overcoming challenges and problems as a good thing, is just something that I know in the last couple of years for me has just really impacted my mental health a lot in a good way. And it all really started with goal setting. But I'll leave that there.
Nice, Kyle. Yeah, I'll jump on that to just bring it into our expedition. There's so much I can say from our expedition and traveling in unknown remote locations, and on that journey to Everest Base Camp with the canoes, portaging the canoes there. Kyle and I were each carrying about 93 pounds of weight, and we did over 200 kilometers and over a total 11,000 meters of ascent, which it's just like Kyle said, there's so much self-doubt there, like just a mounting self-doubt the whole time. And I remember it wasn't until we were about 20 minutes away from getting to Everest Base Camp that I thought we could actually do it. And so just like it was day in and day out of uncertainty and uncomfort. And I've always said to everyone I've talked to about it, it truly for me felt like stripping away every comfort imaginable. We did it in January, which is the winter there. So nighttime got down to minus 40 degrees in our room. We had to sleep with our water bottle in order to actually have water and not a big ice cube beside you. And carrying all that weight. And then I got in those harsh environments, I got sick, and had an infected toe and I lost 27 pounds in 25 days. So it was just, I can't even, it was so uncomfortable, but I think Meagan nailed it, of learning to be comfortable in that uncomfortable place is very, very fulfilling. And I learned so much about myself in that kind of environment. I felt the fear every morning and did it anyways, walked towards it. I've always felt that fear is a common reaction. We all have it. That's exactly, our body is hardwired to have fear, and courage is the decision to continue and to go forward. And I felt like that trip was so much of that for me. And then with all that self-doubt, I remember having every day in and day out, being alone with those thoughts in this peaceful, beautiful, most beautiful place you could imagine in the Himalayas. It was just such it's just an overwhelming experience, those emotions, but then being alone with yourself. And now I have to deal with those emotions and address them and think about them every day for all day, because I can't talk to anybody because my head's inside a canoe. And but at the end of it all, it was so hard, but it's so worth it. Like, putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations is so worth it. I feel like you go into it scared, but you come out of it empowered. And that would be my recommendation as you do outdoor education and trips, is just, don't worry about being afraid and go for it. And I feel like I can promise you it'll be worth it.
I think a lot's been said. And in terms of some of the key words or summary, lots I've heard in terms of, challenge by choice. You have to figure out what your challenge is, but meeting challenges and sometimes overcoming them is the thing that builds courage. Sometimes not overcoming them and finding out where the problems are. It also builds resilience. We learn from our failings as well. So I heard lots of pieces there about character builders. And I heard lots of pieces there about fear too, because it sometimes takes us to the end of ourselves. One other comment that I'd like to make, just not from just a personal place, but Hannah, you mentioned as well, sometimes we're on these trips with other people, and it's very interesting to see what happens to people at a relational level when they're together, because they need to. It brings you to the end of yourself in that regard as well, because we find out where our rough patches are when we're stressed and we're being pushed to the limit. We find out what it's like to have to work through conflict. We find out what it's like to have to communicate. And we also find out what it's like to be vulnerable and to depend on people. My daughter did a couple of trips, and she did one up all the way to James Bay. And then they had to take the boats at a certain time through James Bay and then caught the train home. And there was many a tearful goodbye bid by the people who traveled together, because the bonds they formed were tremendous. What they shared through needing to depend on each other, needing to haul canoes, getting hurt, bug bitten. So it's lots of happiness, but lots of challenge as well. But it builds character through the courage and the resilience that it forms. But it breeds connection through people's ability to be vulnerable and transparent. So
I don't know if I can just jump off of Tom for a second, but you mentioned like you're just in there with your head in a canoe with all your thoughts. And I think that's super important to remember about yourself on a trip like this, but also to remember about others, is that if you're having panic attacks or suicidal thoughts or other like mental health symptoms, severe or not, they're not going to go away no matter how far you travel. And I think that's a misconception a lot of the time, is I'm having panic attacks all the time, I'm going to go spend a week in the wilderness by myself and it'll all be better. I say this because my sister just did it, and she's super open about it, so it's okay that I share. And she came back and she said, it was really great, but I still had panic attacks. Yeah. So it's a misconception all the time, and I think we're all guilty of it. We'll go on vacation and it'll just, all the things we've been worrying about will just go away. Or we'll go camping, or we'll stick our head in a canoe, or, you know, you could work yourself to the bone on your bike or on the mountain or whatever, but your brain is still attached to you. It's still in there. And so just to be kind of gentle and kind to yourself, that you could be in the best place in the world, the most beautiful place in the entire world, and those thoughts or those symptoms could still start creeping back, and that's okay, and that it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but just not to have expectations that everything's just going to disappear because you do something like this, but also not to be discouraged when you do have those thoughts or feelings when you're away and you're outside, because it doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means that you still have work to do.
Yeah, Meg, I would love to just jump back into that too. And it's funny, the first trip that Kyle and I did to Mount Everest Base Camp, where the idea came from, I actually was really anxious a lot of that trip about, I mean, I was having trouble again understanding my own feelings, but I remember waking up and feeling anxious and not present, but yet I was in this most beautiful place. And I came back and saw my therapist, and we were talking a lot about it. And then prior to coming back this second time, he really gave me some advice that was just really helpful for me, which every morning I stopped and just sat there and said to myself out loud, speaking out loud, I feel sad because of this, or I am feeling anxious because of this, and I'm feeling hurt because of this. And just addressing those feelings, just recognizing them, for me helped me so much. But you're right. Yeah, the first time I remember feeling like there was a problem because I was so anxious and uncomfortable when I'm in the Himalayas, and I'm not supposed to be. This is supposed to cure me, right? And it's not just like a cure-all. And yeah, I had a tough time that first trip, and then it was, yeah, it really helped get some tools from my therapist of how to deal with that better, and yeah, it helped.
Thanks everyone for sharing. We've talked a lot about how like being in unknown situations can create a lot of unease, and I guess that's a common occurrence. Being in an unknown situation, both as we move into university, whether that's starting first year and moving into a new city, starting university, and all the things that come along with it, or like going on an outdoor trip in a place that we aren't super comfortable with and just kind of at the mercy of nature. But what are some things that we as leaders should be aware of, and what are maybe some resources that we can use when we're like at home in the city to further educate ourselves? Meagan, do you maybe want to start off?
It's funny, I was actually hoping you wouldn't make me start because I wasn't ready. If anyone else wants to go first, that would be awesome.
How about Nathan?
I'll jump in, but you've got a multi-part question there, Hannah. There's a piece around how do we manage people's mental health while they're in the wilderness? Did I hear that piece? And then what do we do for ourselves? Is that the other piece? I just wanted to make sure I understand the question, even though I have it written down. It just, when you're talking about it, in terms of like, if we're in a leadership position, and I guess, per what Megan and Tom have both shared, it's just an awareness, I suppose, that it's okay for people to be not okay. I guess, borrowing from what you shared earlier as well, Kyle, we can ask the question, right? Are you okay today? I think check-in time, circle time, it's an opportunity for people to be vulnerable and be real. Whether or not they want to be is another matter. That you can't force somebody to be transparent about how they're feeling, but at least you can create opportunity. And sometimes it's noticeable if someone is not very talkative, or they're down in the mouth, or what have you. And that's that's one of my favorite diagnostic pieces around depression. Actually, I say, at a mild level, you ask people, how are you doing? And they always say, oh, fine, which is a real load of crap. But, as a leader, you can't out them and force them to talk about how they're feeling until they're ready. But you can at least occasion opportunity. In terms of, what do we do? I think, maybe there's some modeling there around vulnerability or talking about feelings, or, hey, today I had a hard time with this, or today, hey, I was feeling this way. I really enjoyed this when we were all in the middle of the lake and, everybody pitched over the side of the boat for a swim. That was a high point, but this was really difficult. We all got to camp. Nobody really wanted to get wood, and, it was just really hard to get going, and that was a struggle. So I think there's some ways that we can talk about feelings or model vulnerability, which might be useful. And that's sort of much of what's coming to mind. But I know that interpersonally, we talked at first about, what are the good pieces about being in the outdoors, and then what are the down pieces? But we were talking about it on an individual basis, and I raised that piece about the fact that we're often in those settings with other people. So it's at an interpersonal level as a leader, I think that there's a certain level of, understanding that some people are having the time of their life and they feel like the world is opening up for them. But other people are they're stuck in their head. They're in the most beautiful place on earth, but they still feel down. They still feel anxious. And then they may feel bad about feeling bad because they thought they were supposed to feel good. And we can create space for that. Right? I'll pass the torch.
I jump on there, Nathan, to the vulnerable, the being vulnerable piece. Really, I think is a big part that we can all do as leaders in our community. I mean, outdoor community, and especially university community. From my personal experience, is just being advocates for being vulnerable and talking and speaking with your friends and being open, because I find when you're open, other people feel comfortable to be open, and you create great conversations. And, I can even say from my workplace where I am here now today, one of our values here is to strive vulnerably. And I think building that kind of culture where we support one another and we strip our egos away and we just talk about how we're truly feeling. And we've really built this supportive team. And I really think that can happen within your group of friends or family or whoever your circle of people is. If you promote a culture of striving vulnerably, and it's really to grow together, and it's really fulfilling as well when you do. So that would be my piece of really just what can be done as leaders. I think it's, as Kyle said at the very beginning, being vulnerable is being strong, and a true leader can do that and facilitate and inspire others to feel the same. So.
Yeah, I'll just jump on quickly there with what Tom said. I can tell that we're brothers because I had a very similar answer in a lot of ways to that. But I don't have too much experience actually leading groups in the wilderness. Most trips I've done have been either on my own or with my partner or with my partner in crime, Tom. But I would definitely reflect on that in terms of being a leader in my workplace. And that's just something I try to really, and you can do that, I think, even in university, at school, or anywhere, whether it's with a social group or anyone, but just leading. Sometimes people are reserved to speaking out about their own personal feelings or challenges until they are made to feel comfortable by somebody else being vulnerable first. So sometimes you can be that catalyst in whatever group you're in by being vulnerable to begin with. So that's just something I try to do at my own workplace, not being afraid to admit when I've made mistakes, and also being willing to be vulnerable and bring up the topic of mental health so that my staff feel comfortable that they can do the same. And that's all I had there.
I guess just to summarize, because I feel like everything that was said was awesome. There was a lot of modeling and being vulnerable and like being the first to share that. And a lot of that also comes down to just normalizing it, making it a super normal conversation to have whether you know, are sitting around the campfire and you share the highs and the lows of your day, or you can see that someone's struggling and you ask them or share something about yourself that makes them more comfortable to share with you. Or even, you know, you don't have to ask questions about negative things. You can ask, you know, what are your coping skills? What makes you happy? What, you know, what do you do other than wander around in the woods that, you know, makes you feel relaxed and gets you going? So I think just having those conversations on a regular basis and not feeling uncomfortable with them yourself, then you have the modeling piece, and it just kind of makes that even more normal.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, there's so many little like tips and tricks that we learn through life. There's so many people out there talking about these sort of tips and tricks in life for managing our own mental health and stuff. And I think it is a really fun thing as we grow in this life to share those things with each other, whether they're tips for sort of for mindfulness or managing anxiety or whatever. But one that comes to mind that I just learned really recently, I was listening to a podcast from a neurologist, and he was saying when, hopefully I get this word right, that when your autonomic nervous system is out of whack, there's this really simple breathing technique that you can do that's really, really effective. So simple that we can all do it right now if everybody wants to try it. But essentially what you do is you take 2 quick breaths in, and that's the key. They have to be sort of 2 breaths, and then you exhale. So you go, if everybody wants to try it, go ahead. You go, and you do that 2 or 3 times, and it actually has been shown on a neurological level to balance your autonomic nervous system. So yeah, just sharing little tips and tricks like that, I think, can be really helpful as a leader or anybody in a group, really.
That's super cool. I was also just wondering, and I know, Nathan, you can probably speak on this, and maybe Wayne too, if you have anything you want to add, but what are some resources that like students can access, both at McMaster specifically, and in the community to, like, if they feel like they need help, or if, you know, they want to further educate themselves to like become better leaders, like what can they do for that?
Wow. In terms of leadership opportunities, I think that there's such a wide variety of ways for students to become engaged and involved at the institution. As far as I know, that there's sort of over 250 clubs and organizations that exist. Of course, life looks different when it's a COVID reality and things are virtual, but all of those things have, you know, that's leadership as we think of it classically in terms of position. But I think it's also important to talk about leadership as it pertains to our actions, you know, because all of us can be leaders, and leadership has to do with behavior as much as it has to do with position. So as much as you could get involved and you know, take on a position like you have right now, which gives you the opportunity to lead others on trips and do things like that, I think leadership is also sort of, you know, the way that one conducts themselves with peers in a classroom, how we relate with others and stuff like that. But I think students think of it still a lot in terms of positional leadership, and they're looking for those opportunities. Sometimes it's resume driven, but I think in the process they also gain skills in terms of understanding, you know, soft skills of communication, and then some of the other things that are very much necessary in terms of, you know, time management and administration, because being in a leadership position, Hannah had to corral us all tonight and make sure that we were here on time and make sure all the things went out and make sure the invitations, and those are all leadership and learning opportunities as well. So clubs is the first thing that comes to mind. TAing, being a residence advisor on campus. But again, all of these things are sort of new and changing in our our COVID reality. So some of those things still have the same bearing, but in terms of campus opportunities, those are great opportunities for sort of the student life aspect of things, not just the academic skills that people are gaining, but sort of the out of classroom experiences that really help them and shape them, and often are most influential. It's not necessarily the course they took. Sometimes it's the connections they've made or the way in which those experiences have shaped them that help them think about next steps or making connections. So some of my thoughts on how to get involved and what leadership can look like at a student level.
So that brings us to our last question, which is a bit more general. So what is one piece of advice that you've either been given and has stuck with you, or you would like to give to first-year students? Anyone can start here.
I'm thinking.
I can go because I bailed on my last one.
All right.
Mine's super simple. The first thing, even when reading the question, that I thought of was just be kind to yourself. If you're saying things to yourself that you would never say to somebody else, then it's not okay. And we need to take pride in taking care of ourselves, and we need to take pride in asking for help. And a great leader can ask for help, and that doesn't make them weak. It makes them even better at what they do. And so, you know, university and moving beyond that, there are a lot of changes, there's a lot of challenges, and just being patient and kind with yourself to go through the process, to check in, to make sure you're doing your self-care, and you say no to things that are not good for your space and not good for your mental health, and you say yes to things that are going to add to you and build you up and energize you. And, you know, take ownership over those decisions, and don't feel bad about doing something that makes you feel better or gives you relief, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. So yeah, just be nice to yourself.
We'll go good cop, bad cop. I'm gonna jump in and as the disembodied head here, as darkness has fallen, I'm the disembodied shamanic head here on the Zoom call, and my children know well and have heard and have watched and have witnessed, and so I no longer have to say because they know, because I do, and it's work first, play later. In terms of a university experience, there's a very critical moment at which leisure is not leisure, and leisure is not leisure when you haven't accomplished some of the things that you set out to do for yourself in a day. At that point, it's avoidance, and it breeds guilt, and it becomes particularly problematic. It's not, it's not that you have to go from 8 a.m. to midnight or anything like that and drive yourself hard, but it is understanding that if you're providing yourself with quote unquote leisure activities, they may actually be avoidance behaviors. So I loves me a good work first, play later. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Nathan. One that comes to mind for me is something my mom said to me when I was pretty young. Like, I feel like I might have been going through like my first breakup or something at like 13 years old or something like that. But it was something, I think, when I was just really down in the dumps that she said to me. And it was just that when you are in these hard situations, that we're faced with in life. And this is just something that resonated with me in this moment. So I'm not suggesting that it's the only way, but she said to just, when it's so hard to see what the next day is going to bring and what the path is and things seem wrong, to just focus on looking after yourself in those tough moments. To focus on, she told me that this is what she does when she's going through hard times in her life. She just focuses on our health, like eating well, exercising, doing those things that are that we know are good for us, but aren't always so easy to do. Sometimes when we're down in the dumps, we want to just binge on Facebook and eat unhealthy food. And I think, yeah, that's where I think action really leads mood in those sorts of circumstances. Sometimes, even though we don't feel like doing anything but staying in bed today, getting out of bed and going for a bike ride or getting out in nature or eating healthy can quite often be something that really works for me. Also, you know, doing what isn't always so easy and potentially reaching out to a therapist or a mental health professional has been something that's really helped me a lot as well.
Funny, Kyle, I didn't know Mom gave you that advice because she gave me the same advice.
Oh, really?
It's funny we didn't
I didn't
talk
know
about
that.
But
Yeah.
well, no, I remember I was in university and I was going through a heartbreak and I was, you know, in my room bawling my eyes out for days. And she came in and she said, "That's enough. We're going outside. You need to practice self-care. Let's get you some food. Let's go walk. Let's get some exercise." And it's about like, you know, I always remember that. It was always about, she said, like, do the things that are good for you and treat yourself well as opposed to, you know, staying inside and pining over my recent heartbreak. And yeah, it's funny that you brought that up. We've never talked, Kyle and I've never talked about that, but clearly
Yeah.
my mom's a good mom. We're lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing I would say, just thinking back to myself in my first year of college, it was like when it was a moment for me when I realized, wow, this is my opportunity when I can shape and be whoever I want to be. It's like the first time you become alone out, like, or away maybe from your family or not, but you get a lot more freedom and independence. And I remember thinking like, well, I can really become who I want to become now. And I think there's so much truth in that, and knowing that you can truly be whoever or do whatever you would like to do, and know that we almost always overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but underestimate what we can do in 5 years. Like I can't even describe how much further along you can be 5 years from now or 10 years from now than you would even dream or expect to be. So have high thoughts for yourself. And I'm a big believer in the quote, like, the danger for us is often that our fear is too low and we reach it, and not that it's too high and we succeed, right? It's good to set some big goals for yourself, because there's so much fun ahead of you, and yeah, just yeah, embrace that. It's such an exciting time.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. That's it for my questions. So now I'd like to open it up. If any of the other participants have any questions for our panelists, feel free to turn on your video and mic and ask them directly, or you can use the chat function as well and I can ask them. Yeah.
It's always nerve-wracking being the first one to ask a question. But it's okay.
It's also nerve-wracking being the first one to be asked
Yeah.
to answer.
Sorry, I never went first that whole time. I was too nervous.
Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, I guess you can sign off for the night. We will be posting, all the panelists have kindly allowed us to post their contact information in the Microsoft Teams. So if you have any questions that you think of later on, their contact info will be there. But I would just like to say a big thank you to all of our panelists for coming out and making the time to chat with us, and for everyone who joined in. And just a thank you again to McMaster and Outdoor Rec for making this event possible. But other than that, that's it from me. So I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and we hope to see you out at the other Moose events and the final panel, which is about gender, culture, and race in the outdoors, which happens next Tuesday at 7. But yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful night, and thank you again to everyone.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks so much.
Much.
Thank you so
Hannah.
much,
Nice to
Hannah, for everything you're doing.
Mhm. Nice to meet everyone. Yes, it's great. Thank you.
Yep. Nice to meet all of you.
Hi, Melissa. Hi, Martha.
Hello, how's it going? How was the, oh, do you want to stop the recording?
Oh, yes. How do I stop the recording?
Is it on the bottom there?